Here's a question for you. What is the difference between a spy and a partial mock? How about a strict mock, a test double, a stub? What if I code it by hand instead of using a framework? Would that make it a fake? The language around mocks is an absolute minefield, and it seems to me that everyone I meet means something different when they say mock. Actually, this debate isn't new. It's been going on for about 25 years at this point, and I have opinions. We need to stop calling everything a mock. Let me go ahead and propose a better way to talk about these things. Hi, I'm Emily Bache. I'm a software developer, creator of Salman Coaching. Welcome to the Modern Software Engineering channel. If you enjoy the video today, please hit like and consider subscribing. We are several presenters here and we have a common goal to bring you great advice on the technical aspects of software engineering. Mock. It really is the OG of language diffusion in software. The term mock object first appeared in a paper published in 2000, and almost immediately it was misunderstood. People who were actually using stubs started to call them mocks, and it went downhill rather quickly after that. I remember I was at the XP conference in 2003, and the presenter on stage was Charlie Poole, and he did exactly this. He was describing a class as a mock when it really wasn't, and Tim McKinnon was in the audience. Well, just to explain who these people are, Charlie went on to become the main author of the popular testing framework NUnit, and Tim, he was one of the authors of the original paper about mock objects. So Charlie Poole was some way into his presentation when he started to talk about mock objects, and Tim McKinnon raised a hand and objected. He said, "That's not a mock." And Charlie, to his credit, actually handled this really graciously. He invited Tim to explain. Actually let him step up onto the stage to do so. So Tim grabbed a marker and started sketching on a whiteboard and explained why Charlie was wrong and what a mock actually is. I mean, for me in the audience, this was fascinating, but it took quite some time and Charlie didn't actually get to say most of what he'd planned. I remember chatting with some other conference delegates about this incident later in the conference, and it seemed to me like Charlie was not alone. Like half the XP community at that point had misunderstood that mocks aren't the same as stubs. Charlie himself was a bit miffed that he missed half his talk, but at the same time he was really open-minded to learn and update his ideas. And it's become a fond memory of mine of what conferences are all about, presenting new ideas, understanding different people's perspectives, and maintaining professional respect. This confusion in the community unfortunately wasn't sorted out by this one intervention by Tim McKinnon. In 2007, Gerald Meszaros tried again. He published this book, XUnit Test Patterns. I have it here. It's quite a hefty tome. He introduced a new term, test double, and his goal was to clear up the confusion at length. Mocks and stubs are both types of test double that you use in different situations, and Meszaros also explained the terms spy and fake, different kinds of test double. Now, this effort to clarify all this language was ambitious, but ultimately I don't think it's worked. I just read a book from 2019, Effective Software Testing by Marietje Anić, where he tried to claim he was following Meszaros definitions, and then he came up with this entirely suspect definition of spy, that it was backed up by a real object and let you spy on interactions with the real one. My reading of Meszaros is quite different. Test doubles do not have a real instance of the class behind them. I could quote this, but maybe you don't need to hear that. The confusion over spies, though, is fairly widespread. He's not the only one saying this. I'm just calling out Anić because he is quoting Meszaros as a source and then apparently disagreeing with him. Another common confusion I see is with fakes. If you write the class by hand rather than using a mocking framework, then people say it's a fake because it has an implementation. No, fakes of course do have an implementation, but actually so do instances of test doubles that you create with a mocking framework. You just don't see the code in your project at compile time. But it's not what happens at compile time that's interesting. The type of the test double is determined by how it behaves at runtime. You can hand code mocks and spies as well as fakes. Now, the authors of every new mocking framework seem to change what these terms mean or refer to one type as a different type. It is still an absolute terminology minefield. And this does actually matter. On a practical level, when I'm talking to my colleagues about our code, we need to use words that we all understand to mean the same thing. But of course, also as an industry as a whole, how can we make progress as a technical discipline unless we can agree definitions of things and stick to them over time? When someone publishes a book or an article with an authoritative definition of a term, we should take the time to read it and understand it before we use that language. Of course, if I'm at a conference giving a presentation about test design and there's someone in the audience who literally wrote the original paper, I'd like it if they didn't have to stand up and disagree with me in public. I want to try and avoid that. Okay, so I feel I have to actually go back now and explain what Misaros does actually say that these terms mean in his book. I went back and I read these chapters very carefully, and I'm doing my best to explain these terms without referencing any particular testing framework or programming language.
I'd like to pause there and say thank you to our sponsors. We're extremely fortunate to be sponsored by Equal Experts, Transfig, and Octopus Deploy. Octopus makes it easy to deliver software to Kubernetes, multi-cloud, on-prem infrastructure, and anywhere else. They automate release, deployment, and operations of your software and AI workloads with a tool that can handle continuous delivery at scale. All of these companies, though, offer products and services that are extremely well aligned with the topics and philosophy of software development that we discuss on this channel every week. So if you're looking for excellence in continuous delivery and software engineering, do click on the links in the description below to check them out.
So I'm going to talk about Misaros definitions now, but before they're going to make sense, I just need to mention the three parts of the test: arrange, act, assert. Some people call these given, when, then, but it's the same thing. A stub. This is an implementation of an interface used by the system under test. It lets us control indirect inputs by having them return specific hard-coded values or specific exceptions. A stub doesn't check any particular arguments are passed or fail the test if some method is not called. Stubs are very stupid. They are the simplest kind of test double. A fake is similar to a stub. It doesn't check particular arguments or ever deliberately fail the test, but it is a bit more sophisticated than a stub. It's a lightweight, real implementation of the collaborator it replaces, behaving the same as the real object. But it won't have all the same attributes. It might not have good enough performance or stability or persistence and so on. The archetypal fake is an in-memory database. You wouldn't use it in production, but it's pretty useful to speed up your tests. A spy. This can do everything that a stub can do. It can control indirect inputs, but additionally, it lets you query the indirect outputs of the system under test. A spy will record all the method calls it gets, so that during the assert phase of the test, you can check that all the correct methods were called with the right arguments. A mock. I want to be clear, a mock is not the same as a stub, a fake, or a spy. It is a particular kind of test double, but it's most similar to a spy, since you can also use it to check interactions. For Misaros, the most significant difference between a spy and a mock was where in a test the failure is initiated. Otherwise, they're used in essentially the same situations. Spies don't directly fail the test. They record stuff. They allow you to check what happened in the assert part of the test. Mocks, on the other hand, must be set up with expectations, and they can initiate test failures on their own. In the case of strict mocks, as soon as their expectations are not met in the act part of the test. That's it. A mock is basically a kind of trigger-happy spy that will explode at a moment's notice. Misaros has dummies as well as another kind of test double, but they're largely uninteresting. He does not mention partial mocks, backed by a real class, capture replay mocks, self-initializing fakes, approval mocks, or auto-generated contract stubs. It's clear to me that things have only got worse since Meszaros attempted to clear up the terminology. There are this profusion of mocking frameworks using all these terms and those additional ones, which were fairly inconceivable when he wrote the book. So what's happened in practice is that people say mock to mean any kind of test double. At this point, I don't actually think it's really worth correcting people. You don't even kind of say, mocks aren't stubs anymore, like we used to. We lost that battle. I said I was going to come with a suggestion for what we should do instead. And what is interesting actually about all of these kinds of test double is how you use them to help you write better tests and to design a better system under test. So I'm interested in what role does this object play? That's far more interesting than the way I created it or what my mocking framework calls it. So this is my suggestion for how to fix all this semantic diffusion. Call everything a mock or a fake or a test double. At this point, I don't think I'm really going to care. But I do want you to back that up with a verb for how you're using it. I want you to say, I'm using this mock to stub these values. I'm using this mock to spy on that important interaction. This is a mock that I generated from this contract that I'm using to stub these interactions. This is a mock that is helping me to design this interaction with a collaborator. Perhaps this language could catch on? Just winding back a moment, I may have surprised you there, but one of the verbs that I came up with there for describing a role a mock can play is design. It's one of those things that really got lost in this whole semantic drift for the word mock, because the original mock objects paper was really clear. The goal was better object-oriented design, not particularly easier test design. The authors were using the object-oriented design principle, tell, don't ask, and they wanted their objects to encapsulate the data and the operations on them. And that meant they didn't want to add extra get methods for the tests to be able to check the object's state. Instead, they wanted to use a mock to check the indirect outputs, the exit points where it interacts with the collaborators. Mocks were originally a design tool. As I said at the start, we need to stop calling everything a mock. Although, as I've been saying, I'm not going to encourage you to actually use Meszaros' language strictly, because nobody is. It's a good idea to know what he said and what a test double actually means, but his solution has not worked. What I want you to do instead is start talking about what these objects do for you instead of what they're called. Use verbs. Explain the value you get from the object. Does it let you stub something, record something, expect something, or design something? Happy coding!